We have one of the other aspects of gross profit that can be used for is to really kind of use it as a, in that example with the garlic example that you have, also does it as with the gross margin, is looking at sensitivity analysis. How does that, looking at, this example, splitting out between poor, average, and good, and is that price, is that production? It could be any of those items, and look at how does your gross profit vary depending on what you, if you have a good year, an average year, or a very good year. So that way you can look at which one, just a way of running what-if scenarios. So this is a good way you can set it up. You're good at with Excel spreadsheets. You can set you up a spreadsheet and just change some of the parameters. This one here, one of my issues that are probably, it's under my control, but has more variability than a lot of the other aspects, and that is the number of days on project when I'm out with the goats. So if I'm out on, poor performance for me would be 45 days. 90 days would be an average year, and if you had a good year, it would be 135 days out on project. And that you can just look at how big an influence that has on my gross profit. So that gives you an idea of, gives you some view of risk, as well as just the variability that can happen with that enterprise based on either maybe it's price or production, some of those aspects. It's just a good way of looking at what-if scenarios. It helps you evaluate. Some of the aspects is risk, and some of it is return on investment. When you're doing a gross profit analysis and you're trying to compare two enterprises, one of the things you need to do is to make sure you're comparing similar units. If you have one that's on a per acre basis, or you have something you're doing hay, and you're doing livestock, you may have one on a per acre basis, one may be on a per head basis. Well, if you have you can't compare those two. You need them on the same unit. So in order to do that, you need to convert the gross profit now into a specific unit. And I'll just go through an example on the garlic example that Diane had, and then Mary provided me a spinach example. We have a gross profit on those, and you look at the gross profit for the garlic. It's okay. We got $506.19 gross profit. Spinach provides $65.06. Well, how do you without converting those over to some conventional unit, you would have no way of comparing what does that really mean. And so we need to convert those to a common unit. We can either do that, and this is where your labor comes into, keeping track of what Diane talked about, how important it is to keep track of how much time you spend on on the garlic or the spinach, and when you know that, you can go, okay, Diane's example spent 13.5 hours on our garlic. So we take the $506 divided by the 13.5, we get $37.50 per hour of return on investment based on that, on the garlic. Now we look at the spinach side of it, and $65.06 is a gross profit. Now gross profit, it was three and a half hours of labor time. So you get the return on your labor of $18.89. You can also look at it on a per foot basis. Looking at, because the garlic side, it was it was based on 140 square feet of area used, and on the spinach, I think it was 40 square feet. So you can use those different ways of looking at that gross profit, and so you can compare them on a unit by unit basis, and essentially you're, say, comparing apples to apples, so you can know how those two compare based on for similar units. And that's really the only way that you can really compare two enterprises together. As I mentioned before, you can use the gross profit analysis as a risk assessment, and this is I'm using as my enterprise of meat goats operation, and then also my vegetation management business. On the meat goat side, gross profit gross profit is quite a bit less than the vegetation management side of it. But if you look at the amount of expenses, the gross profit analysis on the meat goat side of it, there's $9,000 of expenses, whereas on the vegetation management side of it, there's over $30,000 in expenses into that enterprise. The vegetation management has a lot more potential gross profit, but it also has a lot more money invested into that operation, so it has really a higher level of risk. If, for example, I didn't make the 90 days of vegetation management, the potential having a negative return on that enterprise is a lot higher. The risk is a lot higher. So you got to. So it helps you. The gross profit analysis helps you to look at that and see is it related to, as we talked about before, the sensitivity analysis. Do you have a big is your enterprise really sensitive to price, production level, or in this example, it's tied back to really money you have to invest into that to get your return, to get the gross profit analysis, the gross profit that you planned in that. So it's just another way of looking at the potential risk of that enterprise. Let's see here. Switch over here. And it also, gross profit comes into play, is that you're looking at as a way of really evaluating the use of an asset. And it could be land, it could be as that trailer, for example, or it could be a tractor. For example, I don't own a tractor. I've always teased my wife that I need to buy a tractor just because I need one. But then I'm looking at, okay, how often do I actually use that tractor? Am I using that asset in a way that helps me really generate more income? And the primary purpose that I use the tractor, I rent a tractor essentially for 3 or 4 days of the year to manage the barn. And there's other times it would have been handy to have, but really can I put it to use to the level that would justify owning it? And so it helps. The gross profit analysis looks at, helps you look at, are you using those assets to the level that get the most potential from them? And it makes you think about how those assets are being used and what the return on those assets are. And just in summary, again, the gross profit is looking at risk, and it helps you to, it's key, as Dan said, is to really look at your current enterprises as each year. I know it made me think, okay, it was profitable last year. It'll be, I assume it was profitable again this year. But how profitable was it? What changed? What impacted it? And why it wasn't? Maybe it wasn't as profitable. Why wasn't it profitable? And try to dig into understanding, a greater understanding of what happened to the enterprise. If it wasn't as profitable as you thought it was, why wasn't it? What changed? And understand that. And so the gross profit analysis helps you to at least understand, okay, what it was, and now you got to go through the next steps of trying to understand why. And there's other procedures for doing that. And it helps you. And the fixed cost side of understanding your fixed costs is that, are you using the land, the tractor expense, all those aspects? You're aware of those costs that are. You know what those are, and the question is, are you using those assets to the potential? And one aspect, and another point is to keep in mind is that really the gross profit analysis is only one aspect. It's solely looking at the profit side of things. It is not looking at the broader aspects of evaluating anything else. It's just looking at profit. And it is one of the 7 testing guidelines, and I know Diane stressed the importance of labor and understanding your labor. And one of the things that gross profit analysis doesn't do is, if you're trying to add a new enterprise, do you have the labor to do that as far as your time, or do you have to hire somebody to come in and do that, help you with that? Because you need to really do a chart of your year and look at, okay, what what time do I have available, and allocate and evaluate that. If the gross profit only looks at, it's only looking at dollars. It's not looking at, this new enterprise you have, maybe have a great gross profit, but it fits in exactly the time when you're busy with something else. So if you're going to do that, you need to evaluate seriously about how you can accomplish that.